Alyssa Mankau, I am so excited to have you in the studio with me today. Thank you so much for coming to chat with me about your incredibly important work.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I know, I am too. And there's so many things that we could talk about. You know, you cover a lot in your work, and I'm going to hone in on certain things, but I know that our conversation is just going to grow and grow. So I'm excited to see where it goes. But before we start, can you tell my listeners and viewers something about you that's not in your bio? And you know, what motivates you? What drives you?
Sure. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker located in Los Angeles, California. Prior to starting my private practice, I was working in the community mental health sector for about 10 years, where I specialized working with people who were in gangs and people who were, a lot of their mental health issues were really very much related to kind of like socioeconomic statuses and the systems that were affecting them. So that's a lot of the work that I was doing before private practice. What drives me and what motivates me is my compassion for human beings, for human connection. Mm-hmm. And what really keeps me going in this field is being able to see a lot of people heal from their traumas and being able to see my clients just, have these changes that positively affect their lives and their relationships with others and the relationships with their children. I really love to see that positive growth in people.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm so glad to hear that you started off by saying your first few years were working with gangs and with people in challenging socioeconomic. Can we start there? Can you just talk a little bit about that? I come from South Africa and I was born in Zimbabwe. So I worked 38 years ago. I started my work, and for 25 years, I worked in the pre-apartheid the transition and then the post-apartheid era in some of the worst areas, helping with trauma, helping with victims, helping with people with learning issues. So that area it's so important, and I'd love to hear what your experience and your advice, and just talk about that a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, that actually goes a little bit into why I started my private practice. So when you're working in community mental health, right, there's so much red tape about the type of treatment that you can provide to your clients, right? There's these things called evidence-based practices, which I think are great, but I don't think they address a lot of the macro level issues that are affecting people. I don't think it doesn't address oppression. So I remember working with clients. Yes. So I remember working with clients and being told, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, I can't do EMDR with them, even though I want to do EMDR I just can't because their insurance doesn't cover it, things like that. So that's why I wanted to go into private practice, so that I could be able to provide that work without all of the red tape. But, a lot of what I'm noticing is because the traumas, and I know we're going to get into this, a lot of the times that the traumas that people experience, they're kind of like little T's in a way, right? It's kind of like, it's kind of like the neglect from the teachers or the neglect from certain institutions, things that have become so normal. Oftentimes people don't think that they have trauma, or they don't think that they went through a trauma because what they've gone through has been so normalized in their communities.
Isn't that so sad? I mean, that's something that really does need to be addressed, that those things that are not normal, that we call little T's, aren't normal, that they've got so used to them that they see them as normal, don't realize it's having that impact. So can you give some examples of that and some of the things that you did to help address that?
So for this community in particular, right?
Yes.
We've been through a lot of community violence. So some of the things that I did with that is providing a lot of psychoeducation and helping them understand that the symptoms that they're going through, like the irritability, the anger, the difficulty sleeping, and a lot of times there's like a co-occurring disorder, like substance use and things like that. I help them understand that this is a way to cope. And if you weren't doing these things, if you weren't engaging in substance use, what feelings do you think you would be feeling instead? So it's really, really helping them understand that their symptoms are a function of coping and a function of survival. It's really important to help them understand that, what's happening is survival mode, and then teaching them to come at it from a very non-judgmental perspective.
I love that. So you've hit on two factors that totally zone in on what I totally believe in and have seen in my research, and that's understanding and then not being judgmental. So that understanding is a key component, because I was thinking, and I love that you also said about the fact that you were restricted with, you had to use evidence-based practice, and there's so much we can talk around evidence-based stuff. But and that will be a conversation definitely we'll have one day. But it also worries me that you can't just go and say, okay, 10 steps for this, and 10 little treatments, and tick the boxes, and and like, find a little thought and then just replace it with this, and maybe if it hasn't gone after 10 sessions, what's wrong with you? We can't do that. And I've heard you say and I heard you say in a couple of your podcast interviews how we've got to look at the individual. And I got so excited because I keep saying those words in different ways. We've got to look at the individual as a case study, as opposed to and with their narrative, as opposed to the symptoms and the checkbox and the label and the diagnosis.
Yes. And I think so many people, while their intentions are well, they're trying so hard to make therapy as efficient as possible. But when we do that, we miss the humanity. We miss the humanity amongst all of us.
Thank you. You and I speak in the same language. I don't know how many times I've said in the last few, because I do so many interviews and do so many Instagram lives. And one of the things that I've said so much lately is we need to be human again. And this whole COVID-19 quarantine, which has brought us to our knees as a global humanity facing a common enemy, I think it's brought our humanity back. It's starting to bring our humanity back.
I agree with you.
Definitely.
It's like we're all connecting with each other again in different ways.
And deep, meaningful connections as well, which is really, really interesting. Okay, so you mentioned the little T's and the big T's. So for my audience, would you mind just briefly defining those and just give an example?
Sure. So I do believe that these terms come from EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And trauma is basically categorized in two sections. One is called the big T's and one is called the little T's. The big T's are the very life-threatening events that people commonly think of when they hear the word trauma. It is a bad car accident. It is physical abuse, sexual assault, surviving a terrible earthquake or a tsunami. It's the events that threaten our safety and sense of well-being. And little T's are the events that we don't normally think of. These are the non-life-threatening events. So, for example, little T's are like, let's say, a divorce or getting bullied at school, or the way a teacher looked at you one day when you said the wrong answer in class. These are events that don't make us feel like our life is in danger, but they still overwhelm our capacity to cope. They still,
So would those be? So those are like the ones in the socioeconomically challenged gang sort of environments that you were working in. The little T's are those things you were speaking about that people think are normal, but they're not normal. It's the recurrent day-to-day bad stuff.
Absolutely.
And people don't always realize that they're having an impact on their brain and their body and their mind. Do you find that? Do you find that as a trend? What is the general trend that you're finding in relation to the little T's?
I think the general thing that I'm finding is probably an increased tolerance for distress.
Oh, wow.
So like that belief, like, it's that belief, like, I can handle it, right? I went through it. I lived it. I'm fine. Right. And I think that has a lot to do with certain defense mechanisms like rationalization, intellectualization, even suppressing. So that's, it's that normalization. And I think oftentimes when people hear somebody's little T's, they think, oh, you're fine, or everybody's been through that. Right. And when we do that, we minimize that person's experience. And when we minimize that person's experience, we're teaching them to minimize their own experience.
Gosh. So how do you handle that? Because that's very powerful what you just said.
I help them highlight the dissonance. Like your thoughts around it are, it's fine, but I feel that the way you're feeling about it isn't matching up. Right? Like it seems like that when you actually talk about it, you're not okay with it. Or the feelings in your body. I help them do body scans, right? Like what is the feeling in your body when you talk about it? And they might say that their heart is racing or their head hurts or there's a pit in their stomach. So I help them recognize that dissonance. And it really is teaching people how to validate their own experience.
I love what you're saying, and I'm going to validate what you've just said by some of the research that I've just done, where we see with the QEEG. So I looked at the psychological, neurophysiological, and the physiological. So we looked at all of it, and with the psychological, not just scales, but we also looked at narrative. And then I have a psychological scale that looks at the ability to self-regulate. So we looked at the person's psyche, the impact physiologically, like hormones, DNA, all that kind of stuff, and we looked at what's happening in the brain. And now you said that people, what you said, which is so true, people will go through something with a little tease and then they think, okay, well, this is happening every day. Everyone around me is going through this. So, I just have to deal with it. I got through it. I'm still here. I'm not dead. I'm kind of coping. But it's there. They haven't processed it. They've either suppressed or pushed it down. Now, we can pick that up very, very clearly because your non-conscious mind is where they're pushing it into. So not the unconscious, not the subconscious, but the non-conscious. And that's an area that I've studied for 38 years now. And it's where all the intelligence is, the belief systems that you talk about. You talk about belief systems and you talk about thoughts being attached to belief systems. I loved how you said that. That's in your non-conscious mind. Now, that non-conscious mind is paralleled by the energy in the brain because the brain just responds. So we'll see the suppression patterns in the brain. You can't see the thought, but you can see the response of the brain. So you can see someone suppressing, you can see how it's damaging people's memories, how it's damaging their emotions. It's unreal how you can see that. But you can cognitively, on a conscious level, be saying, oh no, I'm fine. Like you just described with your patients. I'm fine. I'm kind of coping. They're going through life. They're doing whatever. But deep down inside, there's all this stuff. And eventually it plays catch up and something happens physically, mentally, or a combination. So that's what we've seen. How have you seen when they come to you, when someone lands in your therapy office, have they reached that point where it's accumulated and something's happened and they've exploded?
Yes. Yeah, it's really common. And because, and I help them understand also like displaced anger. Right? Like things are accumulating, things are fine. And then all of a sudden, let's say somebody cuts them off on the freeway or somebody cuts in line at the grocery store. And then they feel like their anger is so out of touch with what actually happened. And so I help them understand the roots of those feelings and what really has been kind of buried underneath for so long.
And you can't bury it because they're like volcanoes. They will erupt somewhere, sometime. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so you then mentioned that you use EMDR, and I'm a tremendous fan of EMDR. I'm not an EMDR therapist, but I will send people I recommend people go for EMDR. And you have an incredible way of explaining it. So can you unpack it for us? What is EMDR? How does it work? And how's it going to help people?
Okay, so EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And before I go into what EMDR is, I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma so I can help people understand how EMDR works. Okay, so we talked about the big T's and the little T's. And oftentimes what happens when a person experiences a traumatic event, that event gets locked into the body on several different ways. So it gets locked into our conscious mind, right? Through nightmares, flashbacks, even our thoughts, right? Like people aren't safe, I can't trust anybody, things like that. It also gets locked into the body. So we might be more tense, we might be more alert, we might be more hypervigilant. And it also just like gets locked into us emotionally. So we might feel more sad, or we might feel more confused, things like that. So the trauma gets locked into us in so many different levels and ways that talk therapy alone, just talking about what you went through, while that's helpful for some people, it's not enough. We have to dig deep into the body's experience of the trauma. So what EMDR is, it's not a talk therapy at all. It utilizes your eye movements going back and forth to help you reprocess the experience that you went through. So I know it sounds like really interesting if you've never had EMDR.
I know, but it's so scientific. That if I may just interrupt for a second, that eye movement is basically just reflecting, because it's about right. It kind of it works around the frontal lobe, and then it stimulates. So it works with the frequencies in the brain. It works with your alpha, beta, theta, gamma, all the different frequencies, and it actually helps to kind of release what's the tension that's in your body, because it all works together. So it's very scientific. Yeah.
So those eye movements, right? They seem to mimic what's happening in REM sleep, where your eyes are rapidly moving back and forth. So it's mimicking that. That's called the bilateral stimulation, when your eyes are going back and forth. And the idea is when it's doing that, it begins to kind of unlock certain memories, feelings, thoughts, beliefs that are attached and associated with your traumatic event. So it allows you to have exposures in very, very brief doses. And the great thing about so the great thing about EMDR too is if you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, this memory just came up during EMDR, this feeling came up during EMDR, as the client, you are more than welcome to control the pace and say, hey, I need to stop. I need to take a break. But it really is brief exposures using your eye movements, brief exposures to the memories.
So your eyes are going to stimulate it, basically that stimulation, because you're using, can you talk about like how you stimulate? How do you?
Yeah. So with EMDR?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you use the lights or how do you do it?
Me personally, I use the tactile ones.
Okay.
So
nice.
So people hold these like buzzers in their right hand and one in their left hand, and then it just kind of buzzes rapidly between each hand. And then I have my clients just sit up on the couch very comfortably, and I have them close their eyes, and then the buzzing starts, and then the memories and the thoughts and the feelings, they start coming at the client's pace. So it's really, it's a really beautiful thing to watch.
So they're using this stimulation, using the five senses, using that stimulation that will send the energy waves through to the brain as well, and then the auditory too. So and there's different ways. There's also the lights, isn't there, that you can look at.
There are several ways that therapists do EMDR, and I think it's really important too for the therapist and the client to talk about what feels most comfortable for them. So there's the one where the therapist can just literally use their fingers back and forth and wave them in front of the client, and the client follows the therapist's fingers. Mm-hmm. There's the buzzers that I was talking about. There's audio, so you wear headphones and then you hear a click on each ear very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And then there's like a light bar that I think a lot of therapists are in favor for, and then it kind of the client watches the light move back and forth. Mm-hmm.
So all of those are using that quantum energy stimulation into the brain, and then it's actually activating the thinking and feeling and choosing, and it's activating the thoughts behind that and bringing it to the forefront. And so, do you find it brings a rush of thoughts forward? Does it bring? How does it? What does it look like for a client who's sitting with you? Is it a rush of thoughts? Is it one or two things? Is it different for each person? And do they talk about it? What is the process?
That's a really good question. It really is different for each person, but oftentimes, what you see are that people will start to remember a little bit more about the event. They might just say, oh, I remember the refrigerator that was there at the time that it happened. And they might start to go into description about the color of the refrigerator, the magnets, just things like that. And then all of a sudden they might say, like, I have this thought that I'm not safe. And then they might even, it's not uncommon for the client to begin to feel physical sensations in that moment. Like, I'm feeling really cold. I'm feeling really small. I'm feeling really hot. My neck is starting to hurt. It's not uncommon for them to start to feel physical sensations that were present at the time of the traumatic event, but have just been very much suppressed.
Yeah, because as you're building that memory, you build the information, because you literally build that physical memory in the brain. This is some of the work that I've also done. And so you're building the memory with the information and the emotions. So when it's suppressed, you're going to pull back the information and the emotion, but you also build in your body state at the time. So if you've got a flu, or as you say, if you're cold or you hot or you were physically sore in some way, you're quite right. That's also attached. So when you call the memory up, everything comes with
everything, yes.
Everything comes up, which is amazing. That's so interesting. I'm going to have a sip of water. I've been talking all day in interviews, so excuse me.
No, take your time.
So we'll edit that little thingy out. Okay, fantastic. So now this is fascinating, and you find it's very successful for patients. Is that correct? You find it very successful?
I do.
Does everyone do it, or do you find it's only a certain type of person? Do you recommend it for everyone? What is your feeling about application and use of EMDR?
I truly believe that anybody can benefit from EMDR, but I also think that it depends on what stage they are in their therapeutic process. So, for example, if they don't have a lot of coping skills, and if they, get overwhelmed very easily, I don't think that EMDR would be the right tool for them. I think it would be really, really necessary to help them in building their self-regulation skills first, because EMDR can be a very overwhelming experience. I don't see that only certain types of people can benefit from EMDR, ask for EMDR. I've seen a wide range of people come and seek services for EMDR.
So it's definitely, that's really good. I love that answer. So basically, what I'm hearing you say a lot is it's a great tool to unlock, but you have to know how to self-regulate. And that's where working with someone, as opposed to doing it on your own, is recommended. I've heard you
Absolutely.
say that before. It's better to be with a therapist.
Yeah, because part of EMDR during the bilateral stimulation, when you're doing the brief exposure, I imagine if you're doing it by yourself, the moment a feeling or thought starts to come, you might stop, right?
Very good.
But as therapists who are trained in EMDR, we'll notice that you're starting to feel discomfort because we're watching you, even though your eyes are closed. And when you're doing the tappers, your eyes are normally closed. We're still watching your movements. We're watching changes in your face. We're watching changes in your skin tone. We're just seeing everything come up. So we don't stop the moment we see, oh, something shifted. We let it keep going, and we let it keep going, and we let it keep going for the whole shift to follow through.
That's fantastic. And then you help them with coping with whatever, because that could lead to a breakdown, or it could lead to some really traumatic thing coming up. Then you've got to be able to manage that. So that,
yes.
So you don't do it for long periods of time. It's brief periods of time, each treatment.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then I know a question we've had from listeners before about EMDR is that is it an ongoing thing, or is there a sort of limited time span that you use it for, or is it just up to the individual?
It really is up to the individual. Like, I will have some clients, for example, that I do individual therapy with, and some sessions we'll do EMDR, and some sessions we won't. I have clients who strictly come in for EMDR, and that's it. And EMDR, the time length that it takes to do EMDR, it really does depend on each individual person. But here's how we know when we're done. Because I know that's oftentimes
good.
People want to know, when
are we done? I love that. Yeah. When are we done?
This is when we know that we're done. So at the beginning of the EMDR process, we help identify what is the memory that we want to target. And then we do together kind of like a assessment of how much distress do you experience when you think of this memory. Sometimes it's a 7, an 8, a 9, or 10, like at the highest. And then we're done when the distress around the memory, both in your thinking and in your feelings part of you, go down to a 0.
That's so good.
That's
so
when
they've
we're done.
got, wow, that's fantastic. Oh, wow. You explained that so well. That makes it, it gives people a beginning and an end. It gives people a good understanding as well of where you're going. Because we do need to know where we're going, don't we? We may not know the path there, but it's nice to, and even if that changes along the way, at least there's a focus point, which is amazing. Now, I've heard you talk about the inner child and the mother issues, father issues. Can you dive into that? Because I think that's, it's important. I mean, it's important that we understand that. It's also thrown around a lot. So it's a word that's kind of, and you see it a lot on social media, and, deal with your inner child. And can you define that and dive into that and just elaborate a little bit in terms of mother issue, father issue? And shame, poor mothers and fathers. I mean, I'm a mother. I've got 4 kids. Sometimes you can, you could think, wow, all the stuff that I've done, and just from both sides, to how do you as a child, as a mother, but if you can talk, because we're all dealing with our pasts all the time. So if you wouldn't mind explaining that.
Yeah, so I definitely don't want any of the parents to take offense.
No, but we got to know this.
Yeah.
But everyone's a child of someone, so everyone's got that.
That's so true. That's very true. The inner child really is the psychological younger parts of ourselves that hold the experiences of our youth. It holds our happiness and our disappointments and our traumatic experiences. It's the part of us that oftentimes are responding to the events that are happening around us today, especially when we're triggered. The mother wound and the father wound, it's really symbolic of our attachment with our parents, right? So if our parents weren't there for us, or if our parents were emotionally neglectful, let's say if your mother was emotionally neglectful and she wasn't there for you, you tend to develop something called a mother wound. And the same thing goes for a father. And we see those wounds oftentimes in adulthood come up in our interpersonal relationships. So it's the type of partners we pick. It's the type of people that we liken ourselves to, or it's even just the way that we view ourselves and the way that we treat ourselves. Oftentimes, negative coping skills or negative interactions that we have with others or ourselves can truly be traced back to our inner child wounds.
So well explained. So if someone's got, let's say, a mother or a father wound, let's say you have a scenario of a father who really loves their children, but they weren't very well mothered or fathered. So they've maybe grown up and they don't father their children or mother their children quite like they should because of, how things epigenetically perpetuate styles of parenting. So you don't know, you don't want to do it, but there's certain things that maybe that's all you understand. Maybe over disciplinarian or too harsh. It doesn't mean you don't love your child. I know there's the cases of pure neglect and pure abuse. I'm talking more the more subtle stuff, because I think that's almost more common, the more subtle stuff where you can perpetuate a pattern in your parenting style that you look back and think, oh my gosh, I mean, I know I've done it myself. I'm doing what my mother did, and you catch yourself and you change or you're doing. So what about those situations where perhaps there's been this subtle father who loves a child but is over-disciplined, or who hasn't been as connected, but that doesn't mean they don't love, but there just hasn't been that ability to really connect. How does the wounded child deal with that? Could you walk us through an example?
Yeah. So let's say the wounded child acknowledges that that's what happened to them. I think, first of all, they have to acknowledge what's happened to them and how it affects them, because I do believe that we can't heal what we're not aware of. Right? We have to be aware, and we have to acknowledge what happened to us and how it made us feel. And then we want to tend to those emotional wounds. We want to identify, what did we feel when it happened? If my feelings could talk, what would they say?
I like that. And if my feelings could talk, what would they say?
Yeah. Yeah, like if the sadness in the pit of my stomach had words, what would it say right now? And we want to hear it out. We want to create a dialogue with it. And so some of the things that we can do is just kind of like a free-flowing stream of consciousness, identify what it would say and what would you like to say back to it? How would you like to nurture it? How would you like to comfort it? What was something that you needed to hear from your parent during that time? Yeah,
that's really good. And I've heard you say that, write yourself a letter. So with all these things.
Yes.
So to take those, so you said, Alyssa, you said a few points there. What would you put into that letter? What would, in terms of the points that you've just described, you got to acknowledge it first, and then secondly, you said what would you be saying? What would that sadness say? And then what would you say back to the sadness? Kind of three sort of levels, or is there more that you would add, or can you define that a little better than, have I summarized that correctly?
You summarized it correctly. And if they could also add, what would you say to validate that child's experience?
And I love that.
Yes. And, we're all parenting ourselves in some way, right? We're all learning as we go, and we're all learning how to be better grown-ups and all of those things.
Yeah. It's all the time. It never ends, does it? Never ends. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't, should it? It should. We should be growing. We haven't ever just like now, boom, you've reached it. As soon as you've reached it, then you're not growing, and that's not healthy.
Yeah, it's an ever evolving thing. So I think it's important, you just recognizing that you can reparent yourself, and what can you say to that younger version of you as kind of like your own inner parent? What would your own inner parent say to that child in that moment?
So then you can recognize what you need, and then would you advise that person to take that letter once they've worked that out over time and confront, and not confront, that's the wrong word, maybe talk to the parents, or what next? What would be the next step after doing that letter?
Oh, I like that. I'm going to say that depends. It depends.
Am I making you think now? Am I making you think?
You are. It's critical thinking.
On the spot.
Right. It depends if the parent is safe and the parent has the capacity to have a corrective experience with their child. And I'm going to I want to let everybody know, if they do decide to do that, you want to identify, what is my purpose? Why am I doing this? What am I looking for by sharing it with the person, who did this to me? What am I looking
very
for?
Wise. So you need to go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You're looking for, that thing that you're looking for. I'm looking for validation. I'm looking for love. I'm looking for a resolution. I want people to know that they can give that to themselves.
I like that.
Yeah.
So you're feeling like they need to, before they go and get the missing thing from the parent, realize that you've got the inner resilience to give it to yourself first.
Yes.
And then then would you go to the parent if it's safe and if it's the right thing to do? To just sort of almost confirm the validation, or just have it, or just to get it out in the open and kind of rebuild the relationship? What would your purpose be?
Yeah, and I would think that the latter is very appropriate. You know, as human beings, and especially dealing with trauma, we heal in the context of human relationships and
Mm,
safe relationships. So being able to share somebody, hey, this is what it did, this is what it hurt me, and this is how I, this is something that I wrote up. And if that person is safe and can listen, that can be a very healing experience. You know, we call those corrective
mm.
experiences. That
Yes,
can be a
yes.
very corrective experience. But let's say worst case scenario, the person doesn't validate it. They don't understand it, because you've already given that gift of validation to yourself. You'll still be okay.
I love it. So
You'll
if
still
I've
be okay.
understood you correctly, you do this letter, you then get to the second point where you're going to now rebuild the relationship, maybe by
Mm-hmm.
going to talk to the person or
Yeah.
not, but you first validate yourself. So there's like 3 steps or 2 steps before you actually get to the point of going to that person, if that's the right thing. Because you do
Yes.
run the risk of not getting the correct response back, or the response you need
Mm-hmm.
back. And so
Mm-hmm.
you need to be strong enough in yourself and prepare yourself for that possibility. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so then you go to that person, and then you do whatever, and you get the feedback, and you move forward. But the big thing
Mm-hmm.
is you validated it yourself. So if you can get the
Yeah.
corrective relationship, wonderful. But you've got yourself in a place where you are able to deal with whatever comes, which is really
Yes.
healthy. Where does
Yes.
forgiveness play into this?
Oh, that's a good one. Where does forgiveness play into this? So, are you referring to the child forgiving the parent?
Yes, and yeah, probably, and whatever it applies. I mean, it's on every level, because very often a child who's been through a trauma or been through those little T's, and landed up in the situation where they feel like they haven't been fathered or mothered or
Mm-hmm.
something, there's that
Mm-hmm.
internal, I did something wrong. So there's the forgiveness of self, there's the forgiveness of the parent, there's the forgiveness of the
Mm-hmm.
situation, whatever, multiple levels. I don't know. How do you feel that
I
plays
know that I
into
know
here?
I know that a lot of people have different beliefs and theories on forgiveness. I do think that it is possible to, um, you don't have to forgive the person who hurt you unless you want to, unless it's critical for your
Mm,
healing journey. But I found that people um, don't necessarily need that. I think what's most important is forgiving yourself, right?
mm, mm-hmm.
Forgiving yourself for maybe the way you felt about yourself when that thing happened. Because oftentimes when little T's happen to us, we blame ourselves.
Yes,
Yeah.
that does happen a lot. I'm sure you saw that a lot with your work with with working with people in gangs and things like that. They kind of feel that they're not
Yeah.
worthy. They have to forgive themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's so
So
true.
it's that self-forgiveness. I forgive myself for
Mm-hmm.
carrying this belief for so long.
I agree
Right.
with you. I agree with you. That's so, and I think also the forgiveness with the person is like a disconnection almost. So if you forgive the person, from quantum physics, which is kind of the work that I do as well in terms of understanding the spiritual. When you forgive, you're actually
Mm-hmm.
disconnecting the relationship. Otherwise, you still have this invisible connection. So you don't you don't
Ooh.
you don't forgive what they've done. I mean, what they've done, they have to deal with.
Ooh, I like
You're
that.
not excusing, but
Yes.
you're disconnecting. So you're protecting,
Mm.
kind of thing. Anyway, so that's just
Oh,
I find that interesting. You said something, I want to transition to another really
yeah.
amazing thing that you spoke about, because it really resonated with me. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Perfect You, and it's basically understanding that your nature is perfect, but that we make choices, and we don't always make the best choices because we can't control the events and circumstances of life. And we make wrong, and we wire in these toxic thoughts into our unconscious in our brain, and that impacts but at the core of who we are is this
Mm-hmm.
perfect you. And I was really challenged because a lot of my audience are quite religious, and but that's, for me, it was easy to say, well, okay, God, if we made in God's image, and God, whatever God is love, God is loveness, then we've got that as our core. And as quantum physics shows us, we wired for love, literally. So based on all of that, when I heard you say what you said, I thought, hey, there's someone else out there who gets this, because I've had many discussions with people about this where they don't quite know how to deal with the years of being, and it's not just in religions, it's also a bit of a cultural thing where people are told at the core they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you challenged that in one of your podcasts. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I loved how you did that.
Thank you. Yeah. So you're right. It's not just religions. It's a lot of like cultural pieces too. But oftentimes people, from the moment they're born and into adolescence, they're being told by elders or their parents that they are bad or they were born a sinner and they have to do all of these things to seek forgiveness. And so, you really just want to imagine what that does to a child's emotional psyche when they're constantly feeling that they're not good. We really want to let go of that belief. And I know a lot of people might not agree, but we have to let that go.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, we have to let that go because no person was born bad. Inherently, we are all inherently born good people.
I agree with you. I agree with it. And it's a hope thing, isn't it? I mean, if you think, well, I'm born bad, so what's the point? It kind of takes hope away. And when hope goes, people get mentally and physically sick and think, what's the point of it all? It's hope that drives. So I agree with you. So do you have to deal with that a lot in therapy? Is that a trend that you see quite often?
It's not something that I see often, but it's definitely something that I've dealt with. And oftentimes I've dealt with it for people who have left certain religious communities or certain religious sects where they're really having to unlearn their views on themselves, because their views on themselves were projections from other people, right? Because those other people felt like I was born bad. I'm going to make you also believe that you were born bad too. So it's a lot of unlearning. Because what comes with that belief system and being raised with it is a lot of shame too.
And shame is, you define the difference between shame and guilt very well. So just take that a little bit further.
Yeah. So to simplify it, guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad.
We don't want either of those emotions. We want to deal with. They chains. I always talk about those, chains. A lot of people do talk about shame and guilt being chains. So how do you help people get through shame and guilt? That's pretty common, that, isn't it? Shame and guilt's a pretty common. Yeah,
it is, and it's so visceral. Sometimes it's not even logical or rational. It's just a feeling you get in your body where you want to disappear and you want to hide, and you just don't feel like you inherently belong in this earth or things like that. So how I get people work through that is I help them, goes back to trauma. I help them identify what were the experience in your life that led you to believe this was true. And then we also, we rationally talk about it too. Are there any situations that would disprove that you're not good or that you're bad, and then just helping them see the other side of things. With shame and guilt, there's so much cognitive restriction. It's a lot of black and white.
Yeah.
It's a lot of black and white, right? I did this, that means I'm bad. So it's also helping clients develop some sort of cognitive flexibility.
Very good. Yeah, I love that. That's so important, to have that cognitive flexibility, to have I call it a possibilities mindset, so that you can see all the different options, that are out there. Because it's not so black and white. Nothing's so black and white. It's not. We're just so unique. It's one of the things that's come up in my clinical trial, which was a little bit of a challenge against the current. I did a random control, double blind, but we brought in single subject case study evaluations too, because not only do we look at a control group versus a experimental, and we see upward trends when you get your mind management, but what was interesting is that individual case study. So it's going back to the uniqueness of each person. There is no cookie cutter solution for any person. What we need is to be able to, and the trend shows, and the research clinically showed that the evidence, you can't take a little number, a bunch of numbers and deduct someone's behavior from that, and they say, okay, this is now the formula. So we've got to be careful of formulas, don't we, in terms of helping people. There's certain things that you can talk about reparenting, and we can talk about the inner child. There's certain common words we can use, but what it looks like for an individual is so unique, isn't it?
It really is. Something that I might say, hey, this is a great thing to do with your inner child, I might not recommend that to another person. It really is unique for each person.
You've got to let them sort of find, so you almost facilitate the process of letting them find the solution, which is so amazing. Okay, so I'm going to transition now to an article that you wrote that I found very interesting about when it's time to, you said, I think it's 7 or 9 tips that you gave. You know what I'm talking about? When you friendship, the friendship one. I thought that was fascinating. I thought that was really good because it's not addressed very often, and I thought you handled that very well. So could we transition to that and talk about what are the signs to know when a friendship needs to be ended?
So that one I really enjoyed writing. And, even when I posted it, there was so much feedback in the comments about it, and there were
I can
so
imagine.
many
I've actually got it up here in front of me. I really enjoyed it. But it was on Mind Body Green. They posted it on Mind Body Green. Yeah, I thought it was really good. Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
so many people
talk.
were just like, this is happening in my friendship, and I really needed this validation to let me know that it's okay. Oftentimes, people feel so guilty when they're ending a friendship.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of reasons for it, right? Maybe it's a childhood friendship, or maybe it's somebody who's really good at being there for you when you're in a crisis. But in other areas of your life, maybe they really haven't been there for you. And people oftentimes feel like they have to keep friendships going for whatever reason, even at the expense of their own mental health. But I think there are very clear times where it's okay to say goodbye to somebody, and, some of those times where if that friend is beginning to compete with you, if they put you down in front of other people, if they've begun to be so unreliable and the friendship feels very one-sided, right? They only call you when they need something, or they only call you when they're in a crisis. But if you need that emotional reciprocity, they disappear, or they're not there for you. You really find, oftentimes we talk about healthy romantic relationships, right? Relationship red flags. But I think that it's also important to talk about those types of healthiness and red and green flags in friendships too.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
You had some of the points you said, they compete with you on various aspects in life and struggle to be happy for you. I found that's a great, because if people want measuring sticks, because people like that, people want to know, well, how do I know when? Because as you said in the beginning, there's so much guilt and shame that will go around. Oh, I can't be friends. I can't be friends with this person. And there's all this thing, but how can you be friends since childhood or something? Yeah. But if someone is, like you said here, they compete with you on various aspects in life and struggle to be happy for you, that's a red flag.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. Yeah. And, somebody had said in the comments, right, there's nothing wrong with a little competition between friends. And I want to clarify, that's correct. There's nothing wrong with a competition between friends. If I am, running a half marathon with my friend, of course I'm going to use that as measuring step, like how fast I should go. The difference is both people know it's a competition.
Exactly.
It's consensual, right? It's consensual. This is almost like, this is when a friend is trying to one up you frequently. And oftentimes what comes with that is they're not proud of your successes.
They're jealous.
Yeah. But you sense kind of like there's a word for it. It's like a frenemy, right?
Frenemy.
So you feel that, you feel that when you share something great in your life, everybody has been really happy for you, except for this person that you really thought would be happy for you. They're not. Right. You sense this like silent, very passive aggressive competition, and then it doesn't feel good anymore.
And you'll sense that. I mean, they may not even say something, but it may be a look on their face or just their body language, because nonverbal is 50% of communication. So we need to tune in, because that really can affect you, especially because you're entangled in a relationship with them. That's not healthy. So what do you recommend in terms of, if like you've got a few other tips too. You've got, they only call or ask you mentioned this one already, if they to hang out when they need something, or you dread seeing their name pop up on your phone. I thought that was funny. They disrespect or violate your boundaries. I mean, is it all of these, or as soon as one or two of them start popping up, is it worth paying attention and watching for the others?
It is. Yeah, it's absolute. You don't have to have all 9 of them, right? To say, okay, the friendship is over. You can have even just one. And it's very important to do your due diligence and to really pay attention. Is this a consistent theme? Is this a one-time thing? But you also want to pay attention to this. How is this making me feel? How is my mental health? How is my mental health during and after spending time with this person?
That's a really good one. How's your mental health?
Is there emotional reciprocity? Yeah. And are you feeling more drained after? Do you feel? Oh, go ahead.
No, that's what you were saying there. That I just was repeating what you were saying. I like that. I like the fact that if you're feeling that drained energy, if you're feeling discomfort, then there's definitely something that's your unconscious sending a message to your subconscious, and your conscious mind needs to start listening to that. So let's say these warning signs are now happening, and maybe 3 or 4 or 5, and it's been going on maybe for a few months. And then you just like realize, I've got to end this friendship. Maybe right now someone's actually listening in and they feeling, hey, I'm at that place. But now they're feeling such guilt about ending the friendship, or they've just ended a friendship and they didn't quite know how to verbalize it like you verbalized it, but they now feel tremendous guilt about ending a friendship. How do they deal with that?
Yeah. So we're going back to guilt, right? Guilt says I'm doing something wrong. And so it's so important to practice self-validation, right? You want to question that. Are you really doing something wrong? Is taking care of your mental health wrong? Is protecting your energy wrong? Is protecting your time wrong? I don't think it is. Right? So you want to acknowledge and you want to honor those feelings of guilt, but you also want to recognize that you're not doing anything wrong.
That's really good. And so once you validate and through the questioning and recognize you're not doing anything wrong, but you're doing it for those reasons, if you give yourself the reasons, if that feeling is still there, what do you do? So do you carry on questioning? What do you still do if you're still feeling a bit bad? Or that person gets really upset with you. So now they cross over a boundary, because you speak about boundaries as well. So now you've done that.
Well, I think there's a misconception that people have to wait until they feel really confident in order to do something. I think that if the feelings of badness don't go away, it's still okay to do it with that guilty feeling alongside of you. Yeah.
Because it's a process, isn't it? It's going to take a bit of time. I mean, I know from my research, it takes 21 days to build a long-term memory and 63 days to build a habit. 63 days. So most people give up in about 4 days. So you can't just think, okay, I've done it today. I feel horrible today. I'm going to give up tomorrow. There's something wrong with me. Don't you think people tend to do that? There's a trend of, okay, I'm going to maybe break this friendship, or I'm going to make this change in my life. Try it for 2 or 3 days, still feel bad. So then they think, oh, they must be wrong. So people don't know how to sit with the bad, do they?
They don't know how to sit with the bad. And oftentimes, if they don't know how to sit with the bad, they create stories around the bad. Oh, I'm feeling this way because I wasn't supposed to do that. Or I'm feeling this way. That means I made a mistake.
Right? So what do they do? Ooh. How do they handle it?
If I was their therapist, I would help them sit with the feeling and identify, what is this feeling saying, and help them understand the narratives that they're creating around the feelings.
Okay. So to look at those narratives, so I still feel bad. What is the narrative? And maybe write that out and work around that. Brilliant advice. That's amazing. Do you have any, just to kind of wrap this up now, do you have any like pearls of wisdom advice that you'd like to give to people just kind of in closing? Or or even say if there's something that concerns you about the current wellness industry, which is so massive, the self-help industry, if there's something that maybe concerns you or excites you. So how would you like to wrap up?
Ooh, okay. So I want to say a couple things, pillars of advice for people, because we've talked about EMDR and we've talked about listening to the body. I want people to pay attention to the signals that their body is telling them when something doesn't feel right, when a friendship doesn't feel right, or even when there's something that they've been suppressing in their lives. Listen to what your body needs. Pay attention to it. Honor and nurture your body through different ways. And, when we talk about the wellness industry, I noticed that there are so many helping professionals on social media platforms. And I think that it is amazing. I also want people to scroll, to mindfully scroll, right? And, take things that apply to you and things that don't apply to you. That's okay.
You don't have to take all the advice. You don't have to take all the advice, because it can be overwhelming. Oh, I need to remember these 5 steps and those 10 steps and these 3 steps, and I must do this. And you can get so overwhelmed by the good advice that's all good that you may just want to select 1 or 2 pieces and just follow those pieces. I like that.
There's so much free information out there, and I think that is so amazing. But I also want people to know that they have, outside of all of that stuff, they already have it within them to do the things that they need to do to help themselves.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Oftentimes we look for other things to help us feel better. But I think, what people don't know is that they have it.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. One of the things in this clinical trial, I just wanted to share this with you, because just to validate what you've just said, is when people recognize that, because I developed an app with my mind management techniques, which called Switch, which they use to, it's basically teaching people mind management. Okay, so when people recognize it's inside of themselves, we see a burst of what we call theta energy in the non-conscious mind, which reflects in the brain, and that's a healing wave of energy. When that wave of energy increases in size, in amplitude, gets bigger, you actually sense, you have an inner sense of peace. So you may still be feeling bad or uncomfortable, or even still the glimmer of, a bit of guilt or shame, but there's a sense of peace that dominates that. And that's inside of us. So when you dig down and find the resilience, well, we've done the science to show it exists. As soon as you tap in, it's there. And it's a matter of, just growing it and running with it. So thank you for what you do. It's just beautiful, and you're filled with wisdom and nice, clear, simple advice that's really good for people. And thank you for what you do. How can people find out more about you?
They can look me up through my website, alyssamariewellness.com, or Instagram, which is just Alyssa Marie Wellness. And if they're interested in reading any of my articles, they can go on Mind, Body, Green, type in my name, and then they can see just the different articles I've written on relationships.
Well, we'll put those links in the show notes. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. And it's been great getting to know you and talking to you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.